Hey, welcome back. Well, it's a beautiful Sunday afternoon. Today is a little bit different story than the rest of them. Today we're going to interview one of the most influential people of Oswego County agriculture. Let's get inside and see who we're talking about. Ready?
Ready.
All right.
Everybody.
Well, everybody, today we're here with the Oswego County legend, Mr. Dale Young. This guy has formed our county into what it is today through hard work, perseverance, and just being himself no matter what. So we're here to get the scoop on who you are, where you came from, and what you've seen in your time, Dale.
Oh, that's a long time.
That's
a long time.
Yeah.
Well, I came out of Wayne County from Massillon, New York. I went to school in Massillon, New York. And my grandmother and grandfather had what I call a subsistence side hill farm. So when I was 5 years old, I learned how to milk cows. And now you know why I was a vegetable person instead of a cow person.
The cow job is not
no,
cows, fun.
Cows are worse than being married. You know, when you're married, you can call up, honey, I won't be home for another hour or so. But you don't do that with cows. But anyway, graduated from high school in Palmyra, Madison Central High School, and that's where I met my wife. She's from Palmyra. So went to Alfred Ag Tech. That was a long story how I got there. But anyway, I got a degree on Alfred Ag Tech. And then there was a fellow recruiting from Georgia. So I had an opportunity to go to the University of Georgia and got a degree out of the University of Georgia, all in soil conservation and agronomy. We did baseball and football. When I was in Massillon, we had a soccer team. But when we went to Palmyra, when we integrated with Palmyra and became Palmac, we had to go to football. And actually we played football on the Wayne County fairgrounds in around the track, in the middle of the track.
Oh.
And that's where all the cows and the horses were housed. And so you had to be pretty careful where you tackled somebody. No, I'm serious. It wasn't only water standing, there were other things standing there too. So, but yeah, we ran track, and track was actually the half-mile track around it was a sand track.
Yeah,
it was interesting. But anyway, I was brought up in Massillon, and at that time, like I say, my grandparents were on a subsistence farm, and they had a hired man who wanted to clear some ground, and actually that's where I got my first experience with mucklands, because I was on the downhill side of a two-man crosscut saw for about 3 winters in a row. I'd walk home from school, then walk a mile up the tracks and get over and into the swamp, and I'd cut wood with him from like 3 in the afternoon until dark, till we couldn't see anymore.
Wow.
Then we'd walk home. So that's where I got my first experience with muckland. But during high school, I worked on a farm. It was Bill Went had a farm in Massillon Center, and there were probably 40 to 50 acres of muckland on that farm.
Wow.
And they were growing spinach, primarily for Bird's Eye as a processing plant here in Fulton. So we grew spinach in the spring, and then we had carrots, and we grew potatoes. And that was kind of a rotation crop there.
Oh, so that you would flip them every year. You wouldn't grow the same thing on the same soil.
And we raised carrots until we couldn't raise carrots anymore because of the nematodes. So then we got out of the carrots, and it was just potatoes and spinach in the spring. Mm-hmm. We tried fumigating, and that just didn't cut it for us. So, yeah, so that's why I got another taste of muckland farming. Coming out of the University of Georgia, had an opportunity to go to work for the sugar beet company as a research agronomist. And not many people remember the sugar beet company, but at one time there was a big push politically to get a sugar beet plant in the Montezuma area. And the plant was built by PepsiCo, and it was engineered by some German engineering, brought the equipment over here, and they said they wanted to let the equipment, it would set the equipment up and guarantee it was running for the first year. However, PepsiCo said, no, we got our own engineers, we'll put it together. Upshot of the whole thing was, we can grow sugar beets in New York State. It's not the ideal situation. You need the right soil types to grow it. But we were getting good yields of sugar beets and good sugar content. The downfall was they couldn't get the sugar extracted out of the beets when they run them through the plant.
Oh, the plant was the catch.
The plant was the catch. They weren't efficient enough getting the sugar out of it.
Was it an engineering design flaw, or was that?
The equipment was good, but it was just not set up right. So anyway, so that ended that, and I feel sorry for most of the farmers there, because Vulching was a fellow that brought the plant from PepsiCo, and he processed sugar beets for 1 year there. Then he trucked the sugar beets up to Maine. You can't truck that much volume that far to get a little bit of sugar.
Sugar beets are a lot of volume, aren't they?
So that was the downfall of the sugar beet company.
Huh.
So from the sugar beet company, I got a job with Comstock Greenwood Foods over in Newark, New York, and that's a subsidiary of Borden's Incorporated, and that was a research agronomist. And I was doing research there with variety work with the carrots, red beets, cabbage, Aunt Jane pickles in Michigan, snow foods, which is mushrooms up in Maine, and some other crops. So I was there for 4 years.
A lot of traveling?
Yeah, some.
Yeah.
But not a lot, some. Funny story, I'll interject here, how I got to Oswego County. There was a conference in Australia that my boss had registered for, and this happened to be in probably late February, early March. I know it was come spring, but we had snow. And it was a Sunday morning. He called me up and said, geez, I'm sick, I can't go. I'll make sure the plane tickets are all set up for you. You got to go to Rochester and get on a plane. Mind you, it's a Sunday morning at about 8:30.
Oh, man.
We had just gone through a lake effect snowstorm. Don't see much of that over in that Macedon area, but every once in a while, that wind will drift south off of Lake Ontario, and it dropped about 10 inches of snow in a couple hours over there, early morning. And then my boss says, geez, the sun is shining here. And I said, well, the sun is shining here too, but we got about 10 inches of snow out here that I've got to clear. Now, granted, I had my wife and 2 kids, and they were both young boys. I said, I cannot leave this house without cleaning this driveway out and getting things ready for my wife. So I don't think I'm going to make it on that plane at 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning. Mm-hmm. Well, the downside of that was my boss was very irate. Mm. So he told me to meet him over at the Rushville office at 5 o'clock on Monday night. I said, okay, so I was over there, and he reamed me something awful. And as he was blowing a gasket, chewing my butt, I made up my mind that I was not going to work for anybody that was that short-sighted, and so I made up my mind I'm done. Mm-hmm. So that's when I put in an application for the cooperative extension. And I knew a fellow by the name of Bob Becker, who worked for Cornell Cooperative Extension at that time, and he made a suggestion I might want to try that. So I put my name in.
Yeah.
And I had an interview up here, and 2 people sat on the board that I remember. One was Mike Frolito, who at that time was also sitting on one of the boards. I think he was on the board of directors for the Oswego County Cooperative Extension, and also Ross Dunsmore. They were only 2 people I remember. There were several people sitting around the table.
Yeah. But
those were the 2 I remember because they were the muck industry.
Yeah.
So we had a conversation, and the outcome of that was I was hired to come up here. So I started July can't tell you. Probably July 15th. It was the middle of summer in 1970. And at that time, the primary crop being grown on the mucklands up here was lettuce.
Yeah.
You know what I knew about lettuce? Nothing. Yeah, I grew some in the garden, but anyway, so it was a learning experience. Working for Cooperative Extension, Oswego was in a business agreement with 4 other counties, Cayuga, Onondaga, and Madison. So I was responsible for the muck vegetable industry in those other 3 counties besides Oswego County.
But primarily lettuce. But I know that my father's talked about how they grew onions to have cash flow throughout the winter. Like that was kind of like what kept them alive to get to the spring for the lettuce to start.
But the primary crop at that time was lettuce. About 3,000 acres of lettuce and maybe 600 or 800 acres of onions at that time in 1970, 1971. Yeah.
3,000 acres.
3,000
so 3,800 acres used to be in this county.
Well, some of the lettuce was double crop, but there was over 3,000 acres of muckland actually being farmed at that time.
Wow.
There were 85 family farm operations on the mucklands when I came here in 1970. 85. 85.
Jesus.
Mike Fleeto told me at one time when they had I guess they call it an agreement, a marketing agreement to sell lettuce. There were 125 people signed up on that list to sell lettuce. They were growing lettuce here in Oswego County.
Wow, 125
There was
people.
125.
And how old were you at this point? Like where were you?
When I was hired here, I was 30 years old, just 30 years old.
30, wow.
Yeah, just a kid. Just like you.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time out in the farms talking to the growers and trying to find some of these people and introduce myself was a little challenge. I remember I was looking for Bart Miano one day and I knew he was on County Route 7 over in Hannibal and I was trying to find him. I'm driving down County Route 7 and here's a little old man on a G tractor, house chamber G tractor driving down the road. I said, it's gotta be a mucker. So I stopped, pulled over, it was Joe Janetto.
Oh.
So I talked to Joe, introduced myself. He told me where his farm was and whatnot. And I said, where can I find Bart Miano? He says, that driveway right there.
Oh.
So that's how I found my way around. And
you didn't just tap it in your GPS then? In your car?
There was no GPS at that time. At that time, I didn't even have a card phone. The first car phone I had was probably 1973 or 4, and it came as big as a suitcase.
Yeah.
It said in the back seat of the station wagon, and it had a 10-foot whip aerial on top, but that was my car phone.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I forget my phone at my house. I turn around and go back. I can't go anywhere.
You can't go anywhere with it. No. Matter of fact, I still got my. Well, this is not my original, but I still have my Oswego County map with all the muck farms laid out. I got the names here, and they're all lettered. So
wow.
I can't tell you how many of these I've made for the industry people.
Right.
That have been traveling around here.
Well, you start out with 125 people.
It was 85 when I got here.
Right. 125 down to 85. I mean, just
80 from 85, 1970 when I came. It was 85, and now we're down to how many? Six. 6
and 2,000 acres approximately of onions.
About 2,000 acres of onions.
Of farmable muckland. I mean, that's kind of where we're at now.
There is a lot of muckland that has gone out of production.
I mean, a big chunk of that was off of Lake Neotawana.
That was some of it off Lake Neotawana on County Route 8, I think it is, over in Valney, Sammy Cucaruda and Trevada Farm. That's all underwater now. Mm-hmm. That's where Jacobson's has their storage right next to that muck.
Right.
Okay.
Santoros, didn't they own the other side? It used to be Coulter's.
Well, yeah.
Off of 45.
Yeah, that was Beatsall Farms. That was 125 acres there, and Kohler's owned it, and Kohler sold it to the government for the Forever Wetlands program.
Yeah.
So that's how it got grown back up now. But that was a good piece of ground. Good piece of ground.
A lot of water, but what DeSavos have there is a nice piece of ground.
Yeah, but that's just an extension. DeSalvo's is just an extension of that going north.
Right.
But that Beatsall Farm was a very nice farm when I was here. It was, had to be pumped, but anyway.
Yeah.
So the changes I've seen since I've been here, what hasn't changed? The only thing that hasn't changed are we still have 6 family farms that were in business when I came here. Yourselves, the Sabellos.
Yep.
Nicky Janetto, because Joe Janetto was farming then.
Yep.
And Dunsmore, Danny Dunsmore. Now Joey Bushart is running that Danny Dunsmore farm. Johnny
is running Santoro Farm.
That's a Santoro farm, and that's a couple of the names in there. I'm trying to think now. I can't remember. But Johnny was here in Jacobson's, because I worked with, I'm working with like the 3rd generation of families here now.
So you worked with Ronnie and Jerry, or
Ronnie and Jerry, but Phil, their father. I worked with Phil, their father.
Okay.
Okay. And their uncle ran the packing shed up to the roundhouse in Oswego.
And you worked with Joe, senior.
Yeah.
The
Joe
first
Janetto. Joe Janetto, I worked, not Joe Janetto, Joe DeSalvo, worked with him. And then young Joe came along, and then Joe Jr. came along. Yeah.
They're up to like 3 or 4 Joes now, aren't they?
Yeah.
Oh.
But that's, and it's just through attrition. There weren't children in the family that were interested in following in their father's footsteps and running the muckland. So
yeah.
when their father got out of business, either passed away or retired or moved out or something, well, then somebody else bought that land up.
Yeah.
Well, how many farms have you bought out?
I mean, in my short career, I've seen Route 3, Pollard Road, Vince's, Grasso's, Patney's, the other side of Lichadello, Charlie Lichadello's, off the other side of 176, and Miano's. Bland, well, it used to be Zappala's, he's connected to it.
Yeah.
I mean,
you got Figueres, Sam Figueres farm, you got that.
Yeah, I mean, there's
Sam Figueres, Joe Arch, Miano. There was another one in there besides Miano.
But I mean, even the
Louis
farms,
and
right.
Louis Arenas and Joe Bonanos, and so you've got about 7 or 8 family farms that you bought up to expand your operation here.
I mean, we're farming approximately 350 acres of onions. We have more land to go with that for rotation, but yeah, we're running all that, and we're one family with there's Rain, me, my father, and my uncle really being the ones calling the shots and employees to run it. And it's, I mean, even in those farms where our home farm was, where my great grandfather started, he started with 5 acres. There was another 5 acres attached to that field
across the tracks,
and then there was probably, how many farmers on that farm? There's probably 5 or 6 on 85 acres, that were farming that. And now, I mean, we've probably taken over 40 family farms, if you think about it.
And that's how the attrition has happened in here. And all this is covered in this book by Jim Ferfaglia. So,
that was a good book to read, and I think it's a good history lesson, but hearing it straight from the horse's mouth.
And one of the pictures I have to bring out is their Grandpa Cerbello with your father David and yourself.
There's the first. There's 3 generations right there.
3 generations right there.
So you were here in the 70s learning about lettuce. Onions weren't more than just a side crop. and the lettuce industry throughout the 70s thrived.
So it was a thriving industry.
I mean, I remember it as a kid, but it was the tail end, and it was never talked about very highly. it was a job that you worked hard at, and you worked for nothing.
I knew that the Sullivan farms were going to be the last farm to grow lettuce in Oswego County. They had the deepest muck. Young Joe had built a mule train, harvesting machine, so he didn't have to use the harvest crews that were charged by the box. And they finally gave it up, 5-6 years ago or something like that, but they still at that time, they were still growing lettuce. And the last time I talked to Joe, he said we finally figured out we were subsidizing our lettuce business by growing onions, so that's why they stopped. At that time, the box was outrageously expensive,
right?
But they couldn't compete with the imports coming in from Quebec. And Quebec has a straight shot right down the Northway into New York City and Philadelphia, and they just couldn't compete with them.
Our labor costs in New York State are just outrageous. I mean, we're at least $18 an hour for hand laborers. You know, like that's where we're at. You know, and then you go 2 states over, and its minimum wage is about 10.
Something like that.
And the federal's still 7 something, and it's hard to compete.
It's very hard
being
to
in
compete.
New York State.
And at one time, when I was working in extension, we did some conferences up in Quebec, and I got to know the extension agent up there quite well, and he showed me around.
Yeah.
And matter of fact, one time he took us into a huge muck area that was being cleared. The cleared muck up there, you didn't need a backhoe. You just need a scarifying teeth on the front of a bulldozer, because it was just white birch. It was so cold up there, the trees wouldn't grow. So they were just clearing white birch brush. But this was being developed by the government of Quebec. This is all subsidized, and they dug the main channel and for the outlet and everything.
And
they subsidized buildings for storages, cooling houses, everything.
And here, I mean, it was always on the farmer to clear his own land.
Yep.
There was some drainage incentives in the 70s, correct?
In the 70s, there were some drainage incentives.
You know, and you don't farm our land without draining it.
No.
There's no way to do it without it. I mean, it was open ditches before drainage, so every 50 feet you had a lateral ditch in the field. I've only been a part of filling in some of those and draining a very small part, but I've been involved in draining our own land my whole life.
Yeah.
But
well, you say the changes, like I say, the only thing that didn't change is some of the 6 families are still here, the same families that were here when I came. But the changes of soil, we still got the muckland soils here, but it has shrunk substantially. As you drain this muck, it compresses. You take the water out of it, it shrinks, it goes down. You get wind erosion, you get sedimentation, and you just have to lower your ditches in order to get that water away from your soil.
The ditch leaving the farm is the lifeline
That's
of every muck farm.
So what has essentially happened in a lot of these pockets now, we got to the point where gravity flow is no longer a possibility to get the water away from the muck lines. The muck is settling below the water table. So we have to go to pump systems. Right. And that's probably the best system anyway, the pump system, because then you have positive control of your water table.
Right, we're controlling it for once.
So when you're trying to grow a crop like lettuce, you want to have your water table about 24 inches below the soil surface. Or carrots. Carrots should be more like 30 inches, 36 inches. Onions, you can get away with it at 2 feet. But if you take your water table below that, you're shrinking that muck even more. So controlling this water table is also going to conserve this muckland. In the wintertime, you shut the pumps off, we let the water table come up. So then the muck doesn't deteriorate, it stays there. The other thing that has happened, we see a lot more cover cropping going on. You guys are finally cover cropping more than you.
Yeah.
And that happened with one day I was over on the Miano farm and the wind was blowing and the muck was 100 feet in the air. Big cloud of black dirt.
Yeah.
I took a picture, sent it to your father, and he says, pretty. I said, oh boy.
He's such a dummy.
Anyway, so I think that is holding your mucks. Now I'm looking at the cover crop you got now, and there's no snow.
Yep.
We're looking at 50-degree temperatures here the next week or so. You're going to have drying conditions, and you're going to see muck blow by the end of the week.
Right, and it changes like that. That top fine layer can
That's
take
all
right
it
off.
is, that top fine layer. And
I mean, over the course of my career so far, I've seen a lot of erosion, and I think there were tougher times in the late, the 90s into the 2000s, and the cover cropping thing it's always been on the farmer. There's nobody else helping you do that government wise.
You got to put in your own. Nobody's going to subsidize that.
No, it's not subsidized at all. But it's for us this year that was probably a $25,000.
It's an adding growing expense.
Yeah, but what did it do? I think it increases the biology. I think it holds the dirt down, fixates carbon too. I think that it helps.
Well,
in a lot of more ways than just erosion. That
green cover crop you got on there takes up the nutrients, especially the nitrogen, so the nitrogen doesn't leak out. So that's going to be in that green tissue that you're going to disc under or plow down or whatever this spring. So that nitrogen is going to be there. It's not going to flush right out.
Yeah.
And we've got research that shows that through the wintertime, we lose a lot of nitrogen. This ground never freezes. We've got snow on it, except this year.
Right.
All right? And as that snow melts from underneath, the water takes that nitrogen right out, takes it right down your drainage ditch.
Yeah.
This cover crop's going to save it. So anyway, that's one of the changes I see is we're doing more. Cultural practices are improving to conserve the ground.
Right.
And so, what other changes I've seen? Change in the varieties of onions. We went from lettuce now, we're going over primarily onions because of the lettuce industry, we couldn't sustain ourselves. So we're growing primarily onions. The onion variety culture changes, the varieties change about once every 5 years. They roll over. I figure for onions, you got about a 5-year generation for the onion varieties. There's always new ones coming on. You have to keep changing varieties to see what's going to work on your farm. We've changed a lot of equipment, big changes in equipment in how we operate our farms with the cultural practices on the farms. Changing the chemistries.
You were a big part of that.
Changing how we apply these. We have a integrated pest management program now. As part of that, getting that instituted with the integrated pest management. So all these changes came into effect.
The introduction of chemistry, you saw that from no chemistry, basically iron was the only weed control you had, to seeing, your prowls and your buck drills and, the chemistry we still use till today, coming in and cutting out a lot of inefficiencies.
When I was a youngster working on a farm we were growing carrots and spinach, there was no chemistry for weed control with spinach. It was cultivation and hand weeding.
Yeah.
All right. Onions, the first herbicide I saw, not onions, carrots. The first herbicide I saw there was a Stoddard solvent. That's dry cleaner fluid. We used to buy that by the 55-gallon barrel, and we'd spray it on just like you'd spray on a
post-emergence, or
spray it on.
And that would control what weeds?
That would burn everything off except the carrots.
Wow.
once you got a couple leaves on those carrots, you could go in there and spray it with Stoddard solvent. And that was a godsend, man. I'm telling you, that saved the carrot industry for us, really.
Yeah.
Now we got all kinds of chemistry, but that Stoddard solvent was hard to handle.
I mean, chemistry's a form of technology. Like, we see technology today being weeders and cameras and robots and all this stuff, but at that time, that was forefront of technology right there. Selective herbicides.
Yep. So we got into the youngins. When I came here, there was at least one grower I know of that was still using a Boland's tractor with 3 Planet Junior seeders on it. That was Ray Walker. No herbicides, none at all. He had one elderly man that carried a pail all summer long and walked the fields. And that was the cleanest farm in Oswego County.
Wow.
Besides the Cucarudo farm, that was another guy. He'd be driving down muck, disking it, and he'd see a weed, he'd stop, get off the tractor, pick that weed up, put it in his pocket, and then he continued this. Honest to God. The equipment, big changes in the equipment. When I came here in 1970, there was Ray Walker had a Boland's tractor yet. Everybody else was planting with G tractors, and they had maybe 4 or 6 Planet Junior seeders hanging underneath them. So most of the industry had already changed over from the Boland's to the G tractor. That was in 1970.
Wow.
The last G tractor was made in 1952. Honest to God. So that G tractor got a lot of work. So when I was, as I said before, I was ignorant of lettuce production, so I had to learn. So I just doing a lot of listening and looking when I was walking around these fields and talking to the growers. And one thing that occurred to me was with this Planet Junior seeder, I call it a hedgerow seeder. There was just a hole in the bottom and a plate, and the seed would just gravity flow fall through. As you travel down the row, and the seed would just drop in. And with lettuce, you had to block it or space it out, hopefully somewhere around 10 or 12 inches.
Right, to get the right spacing.
Get the right spacing to
get
the right head size. Well, depended on the person who was actually hoeing the lettuce out and blocking it and then thinning it to leave one plant every 10 inches to a foot. So when you got a hedgerow, you got 12 or 15 seedlings in a row, and you got to leave 1 per foot. And we had spacing from 6 inches out to 12 or 13 inches. I said, that's got to change. It's too much labor. So I looked around to find what was available for precision seeding. At that time, I'd already been invested in the sugar beet business. We knew some about the machinery then. And I know at that time, Astro was putting together a pelleted seed. It was called the Light Coat. And so I got a sample of that seed. I put it in a greenhouse, at Travis's greenhouse in Hannibal. And I just saw how it come up. And it did not all come up very uniform. It was about 2 days or 3 days apart before they all come up. You like to have lettuce all come up uniform so you get a more uniform cut. So we had a conversation with Asgro. In that conversation, Asgro gave me 2 Stanhay seeders. I begged another 2 Stanhay seeders out of Geneva Experimental Station, and then I had to go get them. I stopped at the Spano farm one day and I said, geez, I got to get these 2 seeders. I got no way to get it. So John Spano says, take my pickup truck. Just like that.
Really?
Yeah. These people had a lot of trust in me, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
So I took his pickup truck, went to Geneva, picked up 2 more Stanhay seeders, took them out to Freddie Stranos, who had a toolbar all set up on an OC4. I mean, this is high-tech stuff,
Yeah.
We just needed something to get this seed in the ground. So that was in 1971. And that's the first precision seeding that was done with lettuce on the muckland soil of Oswego County in 1971 with those 4 borrowed stand hay planters that I picked up from Asgrow.
Wow. And
Asgrow punched the plates for me, used their seed, and we planted it. Freddie just floated some ground and run the tractor up and down the field a couple times to put some rows of lettuce in. And then we had a meeting out there and everybody looked at it. And we had the seeding set up at that time. We punched the belt so they were dropping a pellet every 2 inches. So we had seed every 2 inches. Okay, that worked pretty well. And somebody had the bright idea, well, let's drop these seeds a foot apart. I said, you know, that's really good. And that wasn't my idea. That was one of the growers looked at that. So I said, okay, so we got a belt punched up. So we dropped seed a foot apart. I started out with 2 seeds and the grower said, no, that's not good enough. I want to make sure I got a plant. So I punched it with 3 seeds, 2 inches apart every foot.
So you could select which one was the most.
Leave 1 plant.
Right.
That was the instructions. Nobody was carrying hose anymore. They were just walking down and plucking plants out of the field. Leave 1 plant every foot. Much faster, less labor, more uniform stands, better cut. I mean, the yields were much, much better that way we got. Anyway, from that standpoint, I also looked at some of the stuff that was going on. We had a lot of bottom rot and drop, which is sclerotinia and rhizoctonia. But anyway, you get the lettuce leaves laying on the flat soil, and they would create an environment underneath that leaf where you would get, on a hot weather, you would get this rhizoctonia rot that would come up through the head. But on a cold season, you would get the sclerotinia. And I thought, geez, all our lettuce growing out in California is all grown on ridges. They grow that so they can have the furrow irrigation. I don't need furrow irrigation. I need to get the water away from the plant.
Reverse. Yeah.
Talked to an engineer down to Cornell at the egg department down there, their engineering. And he said, yeah, we can do that. So he built a frame, just a steel frame with a 3-point hitch. And he built a sled, just like they have in California. He brought it up here and we tried it. The sled didn't work worth a damn.
It was
made nice beds, but they weren't firm enough and the sled steel wouldn't scour on the muckland. So I said, let's put a roller in there. So that's how we got the rollers. There was a manufacturer in Cortland, New York. Can't remember the name now. But yeah, he says, yeah, I can build these things. So it was probably 2 feet in diameter, something like that, this roller. It would set in this frame, so we had a roller. And we had, of course, we were planting on 15-inch rows on centers at that time. And you have to take 1 step at a time. The growers wanted to have that 15-inch row spacing. They didn't want to do this 10s and 20 stuff like you guys are doing today.
Yeah.
They wanted 15-inch rows. So we made these rollers set up so we had, the bed was about 4 inches high. Every 15 inches we could put a row of lettuce in there on top of this bed. That lasted for about 1 year. And I think it was one of the Marano boys, either Frank or his brother, were down in Florida and they were talking with Gatsky in wintertime down in Florida. And they decided, you know what? We can put this bed 20 inches wide on top so we can do 10s and 20s. So that's how we got to the roller we got today was some of the conversation with the growers was having. That was my idea. That was a grower's idea. We got to 10s and 20s.
But the roller helped firm the ground up, make a nice firm bed, and get the water away from the plant.
Did a planting on that on Christofoli Farm. And most of it was done with the Christofoli Farm. It was right next to Kenny Sheldon, who had a shop and did most of the manufacturing here in the county for the growers. setting up their tractors and equipment and whatnot. So if we needed something done, we'd go over to Kenny and say, hey, can you do this for us? So he'd set it up. So Chrysophilas were good enough to make a planting. So they planted lettuce using this roller, separate operation, so they had a tractor with a roller. Then they came back and they planted lettuce. When it came time to harvest, we went over there with a grower meeting, and there was a big turnout of lettuce growers at that time, a lot of people. And I remember, I did very little evaluation. It was just so obvious when you looked down the row with this bed, you had these larger, greener looking lettuce than where it was planted on the flat. We pulled up the heads, just pulled the heads out of the ground, and the roots were actually snow white. They were absolutely beautiful. Compared to when we were planting on a flat, we pulled some heads up there and we looked at the roots, and they had some of that rusty rhizoctonia on the roots. And I remember Tony Felito Farms was a big lettuce grower at that time.
Yeah.
He came up to me and he says, why didn't you tell me about this? He started writing, he read the riot act to me and says, Tony, you're seeing what I'm seeing right here, right now, real time.
Yeah.
That was the last lettuce that was ever planted on the flat. 1973, everybody was planting lettuce on a raised bed.
Yeah.
So that's how we got to the raised beds. So to the raised beds on the lettuce, some of the growers planted the raised beds on the onions, and we did see a difference. The onions came up, I think, more uniform because they had a firm bed, and the seed depth was more uniform, so the onions came up more uniform. Plus, we got some control of wind erosion by that raised bed. That helped us.
Right. We see it today still. That's how we plant on a hill.
So we're still on the raised beds.
Yeah, and it helps with keeping, you get a rain and keeps that first 4 weeks of that plant's life is healthier than being on the flat.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really helps.